The Christmas Truce of 914, when enemies found peace in the heart of war. Imagine this. It's December 1914. You're knee-deep in mud, huddled in a trench somewhere in France, the biting cold seeping into your bones. For months you've been living in fear, with the sound of gunfire and artillery, your constant companions. Then, out of nowhere, you hear singing. Christmas carols drifting over no man's land, from the enemy's trench. This is the story of the Christmas Truce of 914, a miraculous moment during World War I, when against all odds, soldiers on opposing sides found a moment of peace. And what it tells us about humanity might just surprise you. World War I was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Trench warfare was brutal and unforgiving. Soldiers were stuck in muddy ditches, facing rain, frostbite, and disease. The days were a constant cycle of waiting, fighting, and surviving. But something changed on Christmas Eve 1914. On the Western Front, the soldiers were preparing for yet another long night when they heard something unusual: singing. It started with the German troops. They began singing Stille Nacht, that's Silent Night for those who don't speak German. And soon, the British troops joined in from across the divide. Imagine being there, surrounded by the misery of war, and suddenly, the sound of Christmas carols fills the air. It must have felt surreal, almost like a dream. What happened next is something that still baffles historians and inspires hope in people today. Slowly but surely, soldiers on both sides began to climb out of their trenches. Can you picture that? Men who had been shooting at each other just hours earlier were now cautiously stepping out into no man's land, hands raised in greeting. They shook hands, exchanged small gifts, chocolates, cigarettes, whatever they had, and even shared stories and laughter. There are even accounts of impromptu games of football being played. Imagine a soccer match right in the middle of a war zone. And through these simple acts, these men, who the day before were enemies, found themselves celebrating Christmas together. It was as if, for that brief moment, they remembered their shared humanity and let go of the war, if only for a day. Many of the soldiers who took part in the truce wrote letters home about that magical day. They described how surreal it was to laugh, sing, and share with men they had been conditioned to hate. These letters are some of the most moving pieces of first-hand history we have, giving us a glimpse into the minds of the men in the trenches. And here's the thing. These soldiers often expressed that if it were up to them, the war would have ended then and there. Many of them realized that the man on the other side of the trench wasn't so different from themselves. He was just another person caught in a conflict much bigger than both of them. That's something powerful, isn't it? To see that even amidst the harshest circumstances, the instinct to connect and find common ground can still prevail. But here's where the story takes a turn. While the soldiers in the trenches were embracing this rare moment of peace, the higher-ranking commanders were not pleased. To them, this spontaneous truce was a threat. If soldiers saw their enemies as humans, it weakened their resolve to fight. So, in the years that followed, military leaders made sure that Christmas on the front lines would never be the same. They increased patrols, enforced strict orders, and made sure that fraternization was discouraged. To the commanders, who were far removed from the cold mud and daily terror of the trenches, the war was a strategy. But for the men on the ground, the ones who looked their enemies in the eyes, it was personal. And sometimes, that personal understanding leads to peace, not hatred. The Christmas Truce of 1914 is a poignant reminder of the power of shared humanity. It shows us that those who are closest to the hardship of conflict often long for peace, more than those who orchestrate it from a distance. Yes, there were a few who didn't understand or disliked the idea of this temporary peace. One of them would go on to become a name known for spreading conflict and hate. But for most of the men on that battlefield, Christmas 1914 was a moment of hope, of what could be possible if people led with compassion instead of conflict. So, what does this story tell us today? It tells us that peace often begins with small gestures, and that the willingness to see beyond labels and differences can create profound moments of connection. If these soldiers, in the heart of war, could find a way to share a day of peace, what could we accomplish today if we focused on understanding and kindness? If this story inspired you, hit that like button, subscribe for more stories of resilience and hope, and share in the comments what moments of connection have meant the most to you. Remember, peace often starts with a simple gesture.